Hi again. We're on slide number 15, and we looked at some petroglyphs earlier, which were some abstracted representations of humans and animals. Um, Sculptural representation of humans are also present in the Paleolithic, and one such image from a cave in France looks very abstracted in a way, and in a way it's more realistic than the petroglyphs. If you look closely at this slide, you'll notice that it's a relief sculpture, which means it comes out from a background surface, and it's a relief sculpture of what appears to be a woman. And you can see an outline of her legs and possibly of her abdominal area. The sculptural representation of human females in Europe tends to portray them in a similar fashion as some of the animals that we looked at on the cave walls. And they are represented as being with child. Again, maybe a reference to that idea of fertility and rebirth. Besides the relief sculpture, there were some freestanding sculptures, even though we don't think that these were designed to stand up. They were probably worn as a necklace or a pendant or carried in a satchel. And some of them actually had rings where you could put a leather strap through it and wear it. So these figures are really small. They're just a few inches high. And sometimes these are referred to as Venuses, named after the Roman goddess of beauty. And most of the figures are very abstract, and they most likely had something to do with sex and regeneration and rebirth. Notice that the sexual areas of the female are exaggerated: the breast, the hip area, the childbearing area, and the face is de-emphasized, which kind of points to the idea that this is not representing one particular individual woman. This is a concept or an idea about the female. This is the earliest one of these sculptures that was found. It was found in modern day Germany. And let's see, what's the material on that? Carved mammoth tusk. Let's go to the next one. For many years, this was the oldest figure like this that was found in modern day Willendorf, Austria. So it's referred to sometimes as the Venus of Willendorf. And as you can see, it's kind of the same artistic convention, the exaggerated sexual areas. The face appears to be either covered with some kind of hat or maybe braided hair around it. So again, it points to the idea that this doesn't represent an individual, that it represents more of an idea or concept, which could be a concept about fertility and rebirth. If you think about a hunter-gatherer society, the larger that tribe or that family group is, the more chances that they have to survive and carry on their genetic information and provide food and working resources. So fertility would have been something very desirable in the Old Stone Age. Many of these figures have been found, and most of these have the same conventions. Again, enlarged hips, abdominal area, large breasts, indicating something about having and then caring for children. There's another one carved out of ivory or tusk. This one is interesting. It's a small relief sculpture. It comes out from a background surface, and again, it's a female form with enlarged hip and breast area, and the face has been de-emphasized. She's holding a horn, and on that horn are 13 marks, which could very well represent 13 lunar cycles, which take place within a year. The calendar we use now is based on the sun. It's a solar calendar, so we have 12 months. If we went by the moon and lunar cycles, we'd have 13. So that reference to time, again, is a reference to cycles. It most likely has something to do with fertility and rebirth and life moving on, as opposed to our linear idea of time. Here we see a reference to cycles and seasons. The Old Stone Age, or what's called the Paleolithic and the Late Paleolithic, is where we see these cave paintings come from, and that was considered to take place during the last ice age when much of the uh, world and parts of Europe were covered with ice sheets. When that ice age ends, we usher in what we call the Middle Stone Age, or the Mesolithic period. So it's a time of great global climate change. It also would have been a time of restructuring of communities. If you think about the older Paleolithic peoples that were able to live in one place and sometimes for thousands of years carry on the same artistic conventions, during this Middle Stone Age period, there's massive global warming, and it changed the landscape and it changed that structure. So people become more nomadic, and we see different types of images being made in some cases, and people themselves in Europe were traveling more in order to access herds of wild animals, which they used to be able to hunt on these large plains that were formed by ice. Now those areas are going to become forests, and the geography is going to change, and people are going to change. A couple of things about the Middle Stone Age, considered to be the time when the dog was domesticated. I'm not sure how people know that. It could be looking at fossil records, and if you look at the difference between like a wild rabbit and a tame rabbit, the tame rabbit is bigger because genetically the bigger rabbits have been selected and rebred, and also they get more food and they get a safe place to live. So this might be a period in time where we see the dog get bigger, implying that it has been domesticated. From the Middle Stone Age, more pictographs or petroglyphs, abstracted human and animal symbols, things that may have led to early writing systems. The Neolithic, or the New Stone Age, is defined by the domestication of agriculture. So this happened at different times in different parts of the world. In Europe, we think it happened around 4000 BCE, but there might be some latest evidence about that. Could have changed. We'll talk more about that in a little while. But we see increased travel and trade among different peoples in different areas. And also we see the fossils of plants get much larger. So things like wheat, a crop that originally grew wild, has now been domesticated. And this changes the social structure as well. So if you have a surplus of food that you can get by growing crops, then there's no longer such an emphasis on hunting and gathering, and not every member of the tribe has to be engaged in the same activities. You can have people that have different specializations, like creating large-scale constructions, which we see take place in the Neolithic period. So the newest parts of Stonehenge, like the great big stones that we see that make the archetypal Stonehenge shape, that has occurred in the Neolithic period. So in Britain, modern day UK or United Kingdom, we see a lot of these large scale stone constructions, including the very famous Stonehenge, and also less famous cromlechs, which were rocks that seem to be sticking up out of the ground. And these were very carefully placed, and it, as you can imagine, it took a great deal of effort to quarry out and then transport these rocks over usually long distances, and then put them up as if they're sticking out of the ground. Also from the Neolithic period, we see improvement in ceramic work and pottery. Um, Here's a fine example of Neolithic pottery from around 2200 BCE. The marks that you see on it are actually caused by a firing process. So even at this early date, ceramics were being fired. You could build a high temperature oven out of stone or out of mud brick, and then have that fire fueled by people operating bellows to get it really super hot, and then use it to put glazes on the pottery and to make pottery more stable and permanent. There's another example, this one being a painted piece of pottery from around 4000 BC. Of those large-scale constructions, one example of that would be what's the modern-day West Bank on the border of Israel. There was a place called Jericho, and there's a biblical reference to the walls of Jericho. So this place called Jericho goes way back into history, and at its earliest date, those walls were believed to have been made to keep out floodwaters from a nearby river. And so here's an artist's concept of what that settlement of Jericho may have originally looked like. And you see huts that are inside made of straw and perhaps mud brick or wood. The thing that lasted the test of time, of course, being the stone, and nothing else really holds up to the elements that well. Here's a modern image of what those walls look like, and the farther you go down, the older the wall is. So the stones that you see near the bottom are the oldest, and then the site was used and reused over many thousands of years, and so people kept adding to it. At some point, there were people that were buried standing up in the settlement, and so the skull was left exposed, and someone attempted to make a face on the skull using ceramics and sometimes using shells for eyes. It's something that we're not sure exactly what the intent was, but most likely had to do with someone who was considered a wise person or someone very important within this group, that even after they died they wanted to maintain some aspect of their spirituality because it was helpful to this group of people. So it's kind of a strange thing to think about now, decorating a skull with ceramics, but these are things that were found there. If we go up into more northern areas of Europe, we'll find some more of these, what are considered Neolithic constructions. Cromlechs are these stones that appear to be sticking out of the ground, and as far as we know, these were not structures. They were not part of a interior structure that had a roof on it. These were freestanding sculptures, and they most likely had some pretty important social or ritual significance, because again it took a great deal of effort to transport these stones and quarry them and put them in place. Lots of different theories about what these mean. They probably mean something, because why else do it? If you think of the mother as being earth, which is a belief that goes way back in a lot of different religions, the mother being something that represents fertility, like you plant a seed and then because the earth is fertile, something grows out. It's possible that this cromlech in a way represents the fertilization of the earth, and basically it could be a phallic symbol, it could be a penis, right? The idea that there's this being something that symbolically fertilizes the earth, and again a form of ritual magic, perhaps, to help the success of this group of people. Sometimes you find these stones by themselves, other times they become parts of a larger complex where you have lots of these stones that create patterns in different sites. Here's an artist's rendition of what it may have looked like to erect some of these stones in place using man and animal labor, perhaps, to drag them over long distances. Dig a hole, build up a platform, and put it into place. Difficult task, implying that this was for a very important purpose. Along with these cromlechs, we also have dolems that we looked at when we talked about architecture, and a dolem being a basic arrangement of these very large stones, most likely a tomb for a very important member of society. Uh, Chances are not everyone got a dolem because, again, it takes great effort to make these things. There's lots of mystery and intrigue that still surrounds Stonehenge today, and as time goes on we learn more about it, and it does appear that it is a small part of a much larger complex, and this complex seemed to be based on circles, circles within circles, and the stones themselves have an astrological significance. There are certain stones that line up with the equinox and the solstice. So on the shortest and longest days of the year, there are stones that would have lined up exactly with that event on sunrise, perhaps 5,000 years ago. As time goes on, we find out more and more about what used to be here, but again, there's no written record about it, so it's still a lot of speculation. One thing that creates speculation is the idea of the enormous amount of effort that it would have taken to move these large stones and then to erect them on top of each other. Certainly within human capability, but it requires a lot of communication and a lot of organization to do that. In the Neolithic period, we mentioned that we have enough food to create a surplus, so you had people that specialized in rock cutting and people that were organized, and it would have taken a large number of people to move these stones around and to put them into place, signifying that this was probably more than just a calendar, and if it was some type of astrological calendar, then there was a viewing of time as being very important, and probably very important in a spiritual way as well. Recent findings point to errors in the way that history has typically been viewed, and the Neolithic period we mentioned in Europe, it was seen as starting around 4000 BCE. That time when humans were making large-scale constructions and using domesticated crops and animals may be much older than we thought. There was a site that was discovered by a German archaeologist around 1995 in what's now Turkey, referred to as Göbekli Tepe. And the strange thing, there's a lot of strange things about this site. One strange thing about it, that it was buried intentionally at some point about 10,000 years ago. And the site itself was probably created around 12,000 BCE. So that predates Stonehenge, that we consider made around 3000 BCE. It predates that by about 9,000 years, which is a great big deal. You probably haven't heard much about this on the news or TV, and the reason is that historians still don't know where to fit this into their story. A lot of assumptions that historians make are based on storylines, or based on research. If we say that things happen in a particular order, then we can try to justify that and fit other things into that story, but the discovery of this site kind of blows all that. And we're still not sure how everything fits in now, because sites like this may require history to be rewritten, and there's a lot of interesting and that's just fascinating, and I encourage you to look at it yourself. If you click on the link, it'll take you to a short video about the site, and hopefully we can talk more about it in class. Have a great weekend. Again, if you haven't done it yet, read chapter 15, and I'll see you guys on Monday.